Hello and welcome to Finding Your Holy Grail, a show produced through Passionate World Talk Radio, whose goal is to educate, enlighten, and entertain. I am your host, Dr. Mandy Simon. Today, I am joined by our very special guest, Sylvia Baffour. Sylvia, welcome. I'm so pleased to have you here today.
Thank you, Mandy. It's definitely a pleasure and a treat to spend some time with you as well.
Thank you. So for our audience, I was actually wanting to let them know that you and I had met during the pandemic when everything first started back in the first lockdown. And we have had previous conversations about building resilience. And a lot of the focus that I've been doing now is really on how it is that we can put tools into our toolbox and live a life that is relatively fearless, which is not the same thing as having a life without fear. So it would be wonderful for you to share with them a little bit about your background, what it is that you do, and what it is that you specialize in.
Sure. So my background is a little bit all over the place. I'm from Ghana originally, and I lived in I've lived in 8 different countries for at least 3 years or longer. So I've spent a lot of my life traveling around, and so I really do feel like I'm a citizen of the world. I don't seem to have an allegiance to any one country. I think it's, in a way, it's a good thing. And I came to America about 2 decades ago for university and ended up staying because I got a Labrador dog that kept me there, kept me in America. And I, got certified as a life coach about 20 years ago and built a life coaching practice, which then evolved into a professional speaking practice. And that's what I've been spending the last 16, 17 years doing. And I found myself in the last few years getting deeper and deeper into the field of emotional intelligence. The idea of how aware are we of our own emotions and how do we use them to work for us and not against us as we move through our lives. And how do we also care about the impact that we have on people around us? So that's stuff that has become really of interest to me. And I think long before I knew what to call emotional intelligence, I think I was learning and practicing it even as early as probably the early 90s. So
Yeah, thank you for sharing this information. And honestly, when people hear words like emotional intelligence, resilience, fearlessness, a lot of it during the current climate that we're in has this sense of being overused terminology. And the goal truly of this show is to understand how any of us who specialize in these areas can break it down for individuals and really allow them to understand it on a fundamental level that allows them to move forward with understanding that if we are able to effectively identify within our own character the attributes that we possess as skills each and every day, we can start to capitalize on that in a way that can be quite powerful in allowing us to already recognize what is within us is something that we can practice bringing forward. And we aren't lacking as much as sometimes we think we are.
no, I totally agree with you on that. And in fact, when I talk about emotional intelligence, I like to use the expression that I practice street emotional intelligence. It's a term that I coined simply because I think emotional intelligence needs to be a practical part of our lives, our makeup, our skill set. And if we intellectualize it too much sometimes and we focus so much on what the amygdala and the hippocampus and the brain and the neuroscience, all when it's so in the clouds, then we're not practicing it when we need it at the grocery store when something has gone wrong, or at an airport we've missed our flight and we've got to manage our emotions, or in a meeting that goes wrong with a client, or a business that's failing because of COVID-19. It's so I like to say that I'm practicing street emotional intelligence, the kind that you can literally take with you every single day of your life, like your own little Bible of sorts,
Yeah.
rules to live by. And I think, like you said, the more we can incorporate it into really a skill set that is just a part of who we are, then the more we use it, and I think, we'll probably talk a little bit more about some of the techniques to help us with that inner resilience and emotional intelligence.
Yeah, because I actually remember when the conversation started about what is emotional intelligence, what is your emotional intelligence quotient, these types of things. They became very big in the business world after not really having much of a place in society. And then it became, well, you don't have to have just intellectual intelligence, you need to have emotional intelligence. And truthfully, from my own experience, my own understanding of this, is that having a mixture of being able to do this is really our ability to take our analytical skill sets with whatever knowledge we've obtained in life and learn how to help it match what is essentially in the environment as it's dynamically happening at the moment. And reading into this in such a way that we can be successful in our communication with individuals.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, I think about we talk about resilience a lot on your show, and just thinking about to me, one of the most practical ways we take our emotional intelligence and really harness it on a daily basis is by tapping into the thing that occurs to us the most in our lives, which is the hearing of our own voices, the
Mhm.
hearing of our own words, and if you think about it, we are living in very challenging times, right? 2020 has had its share of unforeseen twists and turns. People are suffering all kinds of losses, and even in the presence of all this change and uncertainty happening around us, the one thing we lose sight of often is the conversations we are having with ourselves. And I call that the monologue, right? And I often talk about how it's important for us to mind the monologue. So it's I just give you a quick example. I was doing a presentation a couple of years ago for the Department of Transportation, and it was a 90-minute emotional intelligence talk I was doing for about 400 people, and the room was pretty large. And I remember picking on two women who were sitting at the very back of the audience, right, all the way in the back. You know, the people who don't like sitting in the front, right?
Yeah.
And I deliberately waited until 75 minutes into my 90-minute presentation to ask them to pack up their belongings and transplant themselves all the way to the front two seats that were empty. And as they're dragging their feet and coming towards the front, I was saying to the rest of the audience, like, I wonder what's going through their mind as they're moving from the back to the front. And when they came and sat down, I asked one of the ladies if she could tell us what was going through her mind as a result of my instruction to her. And she said, I was thinking, why is Sylvia moving us? I was so comfortable where I am. I know my neighbors. It's embarrassing. I hate sitting in the front seat. Happy hour is in 30 minutes, and it was right after my presentation. And unbeknownst to these two women, I had taped two $100 gift cards underneath the two front seats for them, and that was just a reward for them being good sports, right?
Yeah.
The really critical point when we think about resilience, the really critical point of what I did for them was not to say, Mandy, that at the end of every uncomfortable change experience we're supposed to endure, there's going to be some financial reward waiting for us. That isn't really the point. But the point is, how often are we having sometimes catastrophic conversations with ourselves about what lies ahead? And yet it wasn't even going to be as bad as we think it was going to be. So I think when we're going through really difficult times, the way we build resilience is to mind the monologue, is to literally
Yeah.
stop and say, am I minding my monologue? Because it just spirals. And as you know, our thoughts become our actions. They
Mhm.
inspire and influence the very next things we do in our lives, and they can take us on very different paths. So it's really critical to think about that.
Yeah, this is so crucial. I appreciate the story a lot, and I can only imagine what it must have been like and how it's contributed to each of these women's lives since that example. Because having that financial reward is something that gives us pause to be able to say, well, in the end, it really worked out well. But I loved what this woman was saying to you about the comfort zone, and she was knowing her neighbors, and we can take this example and we can apply it to every aspect of our lives. And before you and I came on air, we had talked about what is going to be your call to action for our viewers and listeners at home today in terms of the context of what we've set up for them.
Yeah, and so the call to action, I think, for your listeners and viewers, really for me centers around something that's sort of a spin-off to this idea of minding the monologue. It has to do with the kinds of questions that we're asking ourselves, you know.
Mhm.
And so the call to action, and I'll explain it in just a short bit, is that we've got to find ways every day to be asking more gateway questions of ourselves. And just to explain to your listeners and viewers, so in life as human beings, we all are going to have complaints about things going wrong in our lives. Something is not right, you didn't get the promotion, your shop is having to shut down, you have a health crisis, you name it, right?
Mhm.
COVID-19, big one.
Big one.
Right. And so we all have private complaints, right? And we complain firstly to ourselves, even before we go to our best friends and our co-workers and our family,
Yeah.
we complain to ourselves. And those complaints happen in the mind, right? And those complaints I find are usually framed as what I call barricading questions. So we complain to ourselves by asking questions that are unproductive, misleading, and disempowering. And I call them barricading questions because, like the name says, they literally barricade in our thinking. And what we should be doing, and the call to action is going to be to find ways on a daily basis to catch the kind of questions we're asking ourselves and make sure they're more gateway questions, which is this. Barricading questions typically begin with why. Gateway questions will typically begin with how or what. And I call them gateway because they literally open the gates to
Mhm.
forward thinking, to solutions, to opportunities, right? Let me give you a very quick high level example, Mandy. If you and I, if you and I were twins and we grew up in the same household, and we had a father who was unfortunately just really bad presence in our lives, pretty much a deadbeat, abandoned us all when we were 7 years old, right? That's a tough thing to have to grow up and deal with, the reality of it. So
Sure.
Mandy, you and I are twins, right? So you and I can go through the rest of our life, let's say into our 30s, our 40s, our 50s, and we could be asking ourselves questions. You could be saying about the same life circumstance we left, right? You could be saying, why did my father have to abandon me and my family the way he did? And you feel, and you're justified. The point with static barricading questions is, yeah, they're legitimate. They're not illegitimate, right? You have a right to ask them because you feel that way. They're just not productive. So you could be saying, why did my father have to abandon us the way he did? I, your twin sister, could be saying, hey, how can I make the most of the presence of my mother and grandparents in my life? So we're
Mhm.
asking two different kinds of questions about the same life circumstance. And Mandy, I think you can see the life path that opens up for the one who keeps saying why, you know, why did I get passed up for promotion? You may be asking that, and I may be saying, to build resilience, hey, how can I creatively boost my marketability and my skill set? Guess what, I'm going to go look for a friend or somebody who I know is in a great position, maybe get some guidance from them, Google things on the internet. So you kind of see
I
the,
love this example. I really love this example. And it's honestly because as you are painting this scenario and you're putting me in the position of being the twin that asks why, I actually feel like I'm being put into a box and that I'm stuck, right? And this was my experience listening to you talk about this and just recognizing that that emotional experience in and of itself is a barricade, right? It's something that I felt just during that example completely boxed in by.
interesting,
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, and
Yeah.
that wasn't my intention, but yet that is
Yeah.
exactly what you
Yeah.
felt.
But it's quite powerful, and I appreciate this example for that reason. And for our viewers and listeners at home, we didn't actually set this up this way. So I love the fact that I'm able to say this to you and relay my own experience with it. And I think it's really quite helpful when we think about um, the how and the what, because it is an opportunity.
Absolutely.
It is an
Absolutely.
opportunity. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is. And we need to see it that way, you know. Yeah, it is an opportunity, and it is what helps us. You know, resilience, as you know, Mandy, is about what are the things you practically do to help you manage inside of you the things outside of you that are impacting you and most likely are out of your control. it is
Yeah.
it is that space in between. What are the things you can do practically? I don't like pie in the sky uh,
Yeah.
solutions, right? Because you're not going to use it. But guess what? You're going to remember to mind your monologue when you're you've missed a flight and you're spiraling out of control. You know what I mean?
Well, and I think honestly, given this example that we've just covered today, for any people that are going through this in life, which is all of us on some level or another, um, there's two things that will happen just from this brief example, which is that you'll either remember to stop and ask yourself the question, how and what versus why, which is a victim. It's a victimization. Why me, right? And if you don't remember to stop and ask the how or the what, you may have the same experience that I had when you sort of painted me into that scenario of me asking why and feeling, having the emotion of feeling stuck and as though there was an obstacle there. So I think depending on how people learn, depending on how they interact with their environment, depending on how quickly they can catch their thoughts between the action to reaction, this can present some very, very interesting scenarios. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
Yeah. Yeah, this is really helpful. Do you have a sense of how this came about for you when you discovered this as being a really valuable tool?
Yeah, did I have a sense of how it came? Honestly, Mandy, I think only because of my profession, as a professional speaker and trainer
Mhm.
and coach, I'm constantly looking for practical solutions to my own everyday problems,
Yeah.
and I came across, I found myself asking why a lot and realized that this was very unproductive. And I remembered how it made me feel when I asked gateway questions. I didn't name them that way initially, right? But there was this
Mhm.
distinct difference between the why me and the how can I, you
Yeah.
know? So I think it just sort of evolved organically as I continued to prepare my own materials and think through things myself and find how can I add labels to it that feel more practical to people.
Yeah, because it really does feel to me like opportunity. And so, for our listeners and our viewers at home, this is your call to action this week. Is it's to learn how to examine your inner monologue with this context in which we've discussed today. And this year is the year to do it, right? Um,
Absolutely.
understanding that to be able to ask gateway questions, which start with,
What and how?
yeah, and never with why.
Right, right.
Yeah. It can really help you in this whole pathway of understanding how to take what you're already good at or being able to examine for yourself some skill set that you weren't sure that you could employ. And this will actually really help your own resilience building. And, when I look at this aspect of building resilience and to live fearless, I believe with all of my heart that in order to live fearless, we have to work on this aspect of building our resilience.
I agree. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing this with us today. I really, really appreciate it. I think it's quite powerful.
Well, I'm very happy to share. It's my mission to help um, help people feel leave people better off than I found them, right? And
Yeah.
little nuggets that help me and that
Yep.
I've used on myself, then I can sort of pass it on to others as well.
Fantastic. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience today?
I think those are the two. I also don't like to overload my my
Yeah.
listeners, and so I think if they can just truly focus, like you said, Mandy, on minding the monologue and asking more gateway questions. Just
Mhm.
I think we become successful with resilience when we find a few things that we can do and do them really well and just get so
Mhm.
good at them. And so if your listeners and viewers can someday be writing into you and telling you that they're minding their monologue and asking themselves, right, throughout the day, especially in those heated moments, because all the techniques we're talking about aren't things that we need when life is good and when things
Yeah.
are rosy, right? And so
Yeah.
something is not going right. Just if people can write into you and say, in the heat of a moment or an argument, I stopped and asked myself, am I minding my monologue? And am I asking gateway questions? then that to me, my work is done, you know.
Yeah,
So,
and I love this example because it's really important. And this is a reminder to our listeners and viewers at home that when this actual show goes out, there will be a workbook along with the call to action that Sylvia has put for you. So you have a place to write it down if you choose to. And we would love to hear from you. We'd absolutely love to hear from you. But before we get to that, Sylvia, why don't you tell the audience how they can reach out and find you?
sure. Well, thanks to social media, there are a couple of ways. I'm relatively active on LinkedIn. So if they just search Sylvia Baffour,
Yeah.
Baffour, they'll find me on LinkedIn. I'm also available on Twitter and Instagram at Sylvia Speaks, the symbol at, and then Sylvia Speaks, and Sylvia with a Y.
Hmm.
And also my website, which is www.sylviaspeaks.com. I can also be reached there.
Great.
Yeah. And
Great.
also Apple Podcasts. Yeah. So,
Yeah, fantastic. And we'll make sure that they have all of this information when the show goes out as well. So this is wonderful. I'm really grateful to have you here today, to have you share and help us move forward once again in this really challenging year. It's absolutely incredible.
yeah,
Yeah,
well, it's been a pleasure, and I hope your listeners do indeed get something valuable that they can
yeah.
incorporate into their own lives in this difficult and uncertain time we're in.
Yeah. And I'd like to thank Passionate World Talk Radio for providing a platform on their internet radio station for my show, Finding Your Holy Grail. To find out more information, you can go to www.passionateworldtalkradio.com and Finding Your Holy Grail, www.findingyourholygrail.com. Please write to us. Tell us what your experiences are at findingyourholygrail@gmail.com. You can also find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, lots and lots of platforms. So until next week, keep safe and stay brave. Thank you so much for joining us. Take care.